So what we want to do in the next few weeks is go through a series of lessons on the holiness of God. We volunteered as a church to prepare the lessons for camp for 2018.
You may want to mention what the theme is.
Yes, I'll do that. So we got together with a few brothers from our church, and we studied the theme of holiness. The actual theme was mentioned a few weeks ago, or maybe more, a few months ago maybe. Can anyone remember it?
Be ye holy, for I am holy.
That's
Very good.
3/4 of it. And God said, "Be ye holy." Actually, I think that's it. It stops at, and God said, "Be ye holy." And the rest of the verse goes on and says, "For I am holy." But the theme of camp is, and God said, ... be ye holy. And so, in preparing for the lessons, there was a lot of things that we had learned in discussion amongst ourselves. And the purpose of that, of course, is to have lessons for camp, but the purpose for the lessons at camp is so that we can all grow closer to God in holiness. And in discovering who God is, it will make us, if we follow through with the recommendations in the lessons, it will make us draw closer to God. Not just for the converted, but for the unconverted as well. So the first lesson is being held by Brother Brian, and it's called Holy God, which I think Brother Edmund had in his sermon on Sunday, W-H-O-L-L-Y, God. And we're going to talk about who God is, and some of his attributes, or most of his attributes, and then specifically the attribute of holiness. That'll be followed by Tuesday, like camp lesson, which is next week, my brother Philip, which will be why do we need to be holy? And third lesson is the path to holiness, which is presented by myself. On the Thursday lesson, which is after that, is Brother Edmund, which is personal holiness. And followed by Brother Eric. Is he on tonight?
No, we don't have the technology in this week.
We're going to record it. And
Okay.
and
So
post
Brother
it
Eric
quickly.
has been corresponding with us half the time he was here, but then he went to Argentina. And the fifth lesson is the Friday lesson, which is, I forget the title,
Holiness in relationships.
Holiness in relationships. Okay, so, and these relationships go all the way from marriage to family to the outside. So, Brother Brian, this is your first adult Bible class, I believe.
Sure.
So please be in prayer for Brother Brian as he presents the first topic.
All right, for many of you were saying, Brian, get with it, it's time, and I don't have a PowerPoint. Thank you, Brother Zoran, for trying to do that. I had a traumatic experience way back in school when taking that course in nucleic acid chemistry, and you had to sit through someone who just read his slides up. And Dr. Pullyblank, very well-known person, said, "That's great." He says, "Here's a piece of chalk, go to the board, do it from the beginning." Poor guy couldn't do it. I'll never forget that. And so I'm going to use a blank board, and hopefully I have, do we have an eraser?
Yeah, there should be a cloth in there.
So as the junior member of this group, I was glad to get the Monday lesson because all I had to do was in 15 minutes define God. And thankfully, as you'll see in the coming weeks, this is a topic that was far more rich in its content and its depth than I ever imagined it was. And the brothers have been very supportive of me to help me as I sort of stumbled through not being to camp, what had to be done and what was good. It's good that we have a small crowd here because I think it's more conducive to a discussion. So I'm not going to be up here lecturing for an hour, writing on the board, and hopefully we can get some input from everybody as it goes on. Three things we need to cover is, as Doug had said, it was the theme of the camp is, and God said, be ye holy. And today's lesson is titled, I'm going to try and get everything in on one board. I've got to take a picture of it at the end because for you wordsmiths, we are not being flippant when we are spelling the word holy like that, because our goal today is to definitely define the whole of God and not just parts of Him and pieces of Him. If you have your Bibles, let's turn to, so let me just backtrack a little bit. My goal here is to, like I said, we're going to define God, we're going to define who He is, and then we're going to look at holiness and some misconceptions. So 3 major themes. So let's turn to Leviticus chapter 19. Verse 2. Speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say unto them, Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now I submit to you that that's everything. That is everything that we as Christians believe here. Everything else we do, everything else we talk about is either commentary or a footnote to that. The Lord is saying, I am holy, therefore may the divine life that is in me be in you, and you be holy. And that's it. Now as Christians, we obviously want to dig deeper into the commentary. But to really understand God and Himself, we have to first understand why we worship Him, why it's so important. We have to define all of His attributes. And I think it's important that before we talk about holiness, about being holy, about projecting holiness, or even the thought of becoming holy ourselves, we have to first define who God is. If He said it, and we say He said it to be holy, we need to find out why. Why do we worship our God the way we do? And so the first thing I think we've got to outline is, who is God? I mean, talk about the unregenerate, the unbelievers. They will tell you, oh God, He's just the supreme example of a category being, and that is a disservice to God. That is certainly not what we believe in. So I want to start with getting some input on defining God. What do you think, what comes into your mind when you think of God? For those of you who read Tozer, he wrote once that what we think of God, what comes into our mind when we think of God, may reveal the most important thing about us. Think about it for a few minutes, a few seconds here. You think of the word holiness, what comes into your head? What comes into your head when you think of God? And we have to define who God is. So let's start with just naming a few attributes of God. These are characteristic traits that we can describe the God that we worship. And I've heard as few as 3, and I've heard as much as 50. We're going to get it down to, I'm not going to tell you what the thing is, because I think the list is a lot longer than you think it's going to be. So, can anyone start? Vicki?
I think of creator.
Creator, that's okay. So, these are going to be in no particular order. None usurps the other, none supersedes the other. So, creator. Fine. Any others?
Perfect.
If I was going to say, let me do it this way. If I was going to say, the question should be better put this way. If I was going to say, God is ... We say creator, nothing wrong with that. Next, perfect.
Faithful.
Perfect, faithful.
No.
Any others?
No.
Love.
My favorite one, thank you brother, love.
Relational.
Okay, all right. So a lot of these will have a little bit of overlap.
I am that I am.
Self-existent.
So the fancy word, what's the word we look at? Aseity. Is that right?
Okay.
Meaning that God has no cause. He is the great uncaused cause of everything.
Aseity is the word coming from the Latin word for himself. So he is self-existent. And that could entail a whole lot of things, right? From eternity to eternity, self-existence. I am.
And therefore, he must be a spirit too. It's an interesting
Spirit.
thing. Matter cannot cause a spirit, but a spirit.
God is spiritual, yes.
Everlasting.
Everlasting, okay.
Eternal.
Eternal.
Omnipotent.
Omnipotent,
So yes, so they'll go for the all 3. Omnipotent.
omnipresent, omniscient.
Present.
Forgiving.
Forgiving, yes.
Merciful, yeah.
He is
That, it's just another way of stating that. Okay.
merciful.
Just.
Just.
Father.
Father.
Present.
So that omnipresent, I guess.
Sustainer.
Again, sustainer, okay.
Faithful, would that be?
I think we have
Faithful.
faithful. Faithful's here, faithful's here.
It's linked, but
Sustainer was said.
Sustainer.
His creation.
Merciful was said.
yeah,
Merciful was
that's
said.
at the bottom, it's hard to see.
Good.
Good, yes.
All the time.
So a lot of these will have, good. I think we had grace coming off of good, and
Righteous, it would. kind of
righteous
fit
would be
with
kind of
just
fit
and
with
good.
just. Yeah.
Terrible,
And
terrible.
Terrible,
Oh, okay. That one didn't make my list, but yes.
or awesome, I guess, would be also.
One says jealous also.
The old term for,
Jealous is a good one.
the old term for awesome is awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So when-
King James, the awful thing.
Yeah, the awful. So you have to be careful which era you read that.
Pure.
Yeah.
Pure.
Pure. Protector.
I prefer the old English.
Protector, sure.
You didn't put down holy yet, right?
That wasn't me.
Good. Good. Holy. Holy. Yes. There you go. How obvious is that?
Couldn't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. How about, let me suggest sovereign.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that leads us to another one.
Divine.
His attribute, one of his attributes is foreknowledge,
Foreknowledge is another.
which is
Is
this
omniscient?
omniscient means he knows
All-knowing.
everything,
This is kind of.
but doesn't necessarily give
It's more
you.
descriptive.
Yeah.
So we're already past 20 here.
Divine was
This-
was an attribute given, but that's kind of self-defined.
Invisible,
Yeah, that's spirit.
spirit,
That's
yeah.
spirit. So you can see, I mean, this list is already longer than I had when I come in. You hear these three all the time. These three, you hear sovereign, you hear creator, you hear perfect, faithful. This is obviously, I've got a little, that's the big one for me. I think we all have an idea of who he is. And why is it important then that we know all of these attributes?
Because some of them we need to reflect. We need to possess ourselves.
You need to know everything about God. You need to know everything that he offers, everything that he is before. Listen, we drop to our knees twice a day, twice on Sundays for some reason. And there's 20 reasons for that. And I think that this is a good start, but definitely a lot longer than I had ever imagined that it would be to do. None of these, now, if there's 20 here, does this mean that God is 5% each to make up 100%? Yeah, God is 100% creator, 100% perfect, 100% faithful. That's, I think, important to also keep in mind.
He's the definition of these things.
He is, and we'll get to that later, right? These are not 20 pieces of one pie. These are all interwoven. These are all 100% following. He is not one part spirit, one part this. He is everything. And so to fully understand why we drop to our knees, why we worship him, there's 20 reasons right there. And for us to know and to grow in our knowledge of God, we have to actually experience and to know what this is. And which takes us into holiness. I think we can understand, can we all agree that this is a pretty good list? That this covers just about everything. We could go on, I think, here. But I think for the sake of time, that this gets us started. So, where does this take us now into holiness? And how do we define holiness? If we look in the Bible, especially the Hebrew word, kadosh, it connotes a sense of other, of separate, of other than, of not of this world. And Brother Phil had noted on to me that you look in Isaiah, kadosh is, well, holy, holy, holy is said 3 times. There are very few places in the Bible where the word holy is repeated, or any word is repeated 3 times. We have verily, verily twice, and any times you see a repetition in the Bible, it usually means listen up, because something here is very, very important. So, when it comes now to holiness, we have to have sort of 5 definitions, what I have as what holiness really entails. And the first one I had was separate or other. Can anyone think of anything else? We are separated / dedicated for some purpose. Right? Holiness has 5 facets. It probably has more. We're going to cover 5 tonight. Separate or dedicated for purpose. What is God's project? It's a new people, Israel. It is people who are conformed to the mind of God, His heart, who in a peculiar way listen to God and what He says and what He has planned.
You shall be my people, and I shall be your God.
She'll be my people. So there's that. Now, a lot of what we have here, we've got plenty of Bible verses to back this up. So you can come to me later, and we have. Brother Doug helped me out quite a bit with sort of backfilling where all of these things come into. But if we are dedicated for some purpose, it implies a sort of consecration and a purpose for God. 3, the holiness of God is transcendent.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
It's-
Anyone?
He's over the limits of time and space and every other limit.
Right, he's wholly independent of any material universe or anything here on earth. It's spiritually and ethically pure. Now, I think it also sort of connotes some type of moral excellence, but I think it also, I think people understand ontologically there's a difference between his, but this is a sense of something separate, not only ontologically, but separate from the sin of the world. That God is not part of the sin of this
What
world.
does ontological mean?
He's not. Ontology is the study of the nature and essence of things. People understand that God is different, generally speaking, and, well, specifically speaking. But what we're talking about here, this transcendence, is that he's separate from the sin of this world. He has no part in what in that. Holiness of God. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm thinking about implications of that. In today's culture, I see that everyone is kind of retreating to their special interest groups, their tribes, and their postmodern kind of division. And you can't tell me anything because you don't, I as a white male can't tell a black female anything or whatever, right? We're all making these categories, but God transcends all these distinctions by which, we are separating ourselves from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And no longer can we kind of wall ourselves off from Him, because He's above all those distinctions.
Yeah, that's transcendence versus relativity.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, that's separate. I was thinking about that, we look for, someone, can you relate to me? Can you identify with me? Can you, do you feel what I feel? But God did do that through Jesus, but He also, He is distinct from, He's not kind of dragged down to our level. There's the separated fromness. I'm still getting my head around that, but that's somehow essential to holiness.
Well, it speaks to the commonality of the experience as opposed to the differences, which is really interesting. So holiness is this separation, right? God's transcendence we can actually relate to through Jesus Christ. But sin then focuses on the individual, right? So God pulls everything together. It's like the idea of university, right? Finding unity and diversity. That's the transcendence of God that unites everything. The supreme creator, the father of all, as Paul says. And yet the modern thing, right, is to focus on the differences. And you can't understand me, you can't relate to me because of your unconscious bias. And yeah, God's holiness is something that we can actually all relate to, even though it's separate from us. It's a thread that goes across culture and
Yeah, across across time.
Yeah, time. So, it's so big, so vast.
Vic, you want to say
Number 4,
something?
God's
Vic, you wanna say
Oh,
something?
go
Without
ahead.
mistake. When I think
mistake.
of holy, I think of without mistake, without blemish.
error.
Sure.
Pure.
But we have perfect up here,
No, I meant for the holy.
holiness.
I think of holiness.
Oh, as a facet of holiness.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that comes from here. We were, you want to
But you're gonna
say,
put it down.
you want to say, you want to say
Pure?
perfect again? Pure?
Morally pure.
Morally pure?
Yeah, there's more purity there.
Yes, that's it.
Without any flaw. Without
Yes,
any-
without flaw.
The Bible says that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all, First John. So he's morally pure.
Does, number 4, the holiness of God evokes, with all of these attributes, with all of these facets of holiness, he evokes a sense of veneration. That goes back into the beginning, of why we are here worshiping, veneration and awe for who he is. Us being specks, him being the ultimate creator. And 5, or sorry, it's going to be 6 now. God is super human. I'm going to say fatal power. I think this one here, veneration and awe, you might attach to love. This one here, you might attach to fear. These two may come up in lessons down the road. But love and fear do form the basis of a small triangle that comes up to here, saying of devotion. Doug, he'll talk about that here, about devotion being up here, love here, and fear here. Important, I won't touch on that now. Not
So
qualified.
the apex is devotion then, right?
And devotion up here, exactly.
Desire, actually. The whole thing is devotion. So, what examples do we have, for example, that we see in the Bible concerning superhuman fatal power? What do we see in the Bible? Some verses that actually state that.
When Uzzah stretched out his hand to touch the ark, that was a holy thing.
Okay.
And he did an unholy action,
Exactly.
and there was,
Bang. Right?
and there was no second chance given.
Hebrews chapter 12. I've got my notes here.
Achan?
Achan?
Achan.
When they stoned him when-
That was an interesting one too, because in that, like, we talk about holiness being separated. So an interesting, sort of the other side to holy is cursed. So it's kind of the opposite. Both are devoted. One is devoted to life, and the other is devoted to destruction and death. So when Jericho was appointed, everything in it is to be destroyed, totally, fully. There was nothing, no quarter given, not even the stuff that was there. Everything was to be burned. So it was a holy God showing something totally separated and devoted to destruction. And then when Achan transgressed that, you saw the sixth plague in action.
You could go throughout the whole Bible and see, can you imagine creation, for example? Can you imagine creation? Out of nowhere. The earth starts, out of nothing, the earth starts forming. And all of a sudden you see a head and arms and legs and the features that come in. And then God breathes into him and he becomes this. That to me is awesome. To see someone rise out of the dust and he's a man that was never here. No other creatures like him. Or when Jacob wrestled with the angel, he said, I've seen God and I live. Right? No man can see God and live, the scripture says. But these examples of his awesomeness and power that we cannot explain.
Okay, so given all these attributes, given the aspects of holy, can we sum up what holiness is in a neat way of saying, what does it mean to be holy? I submit to you, we've heard, that holiness is the perfection of all of God's attributes, and therefore is ipso facto or absolute frame of reference. It is necessarily transcendent, because nothing in this world can make the same plane or be the source of everything good, just, faithful, loving, forgiving, beautiful, or holy. And so participating in the essence and substance of God, prayer, worship, fellowship, baptism, the Lord's Supper, among many others, is meant to bring us to this spiritual end, to be transformed and have the divine life of holiness in us. Now that's maybe a long sentence, but that's probably one of the best ones I've heard that sort of sums up, if we can say that it is the personified perfection of all of God's attributes, and well, it's now 6, we had 5, 6 aspects of holiness. So we're moving along fairly quickly here.
I think it's good to step back and just look at each one of these and just give a few bullet points as to separate. God is separate from us, that's no question.
Okay, here's a tangible example of the separateness. Think of the Jerusalem temple. Think of our church here. What we have separate is the sanctuary. In the temple, we had the Holy of Holies. Where was that? What was that?
Where God dwelled.
That's where God dwelt. That was an inner sanctum. That was separate, other. And you can see the same thing here. Our sanctuary is separate. We worship in that room. It's very simple. I think of the Jerusalem temple, for me, to think about it in that way is a way of knowing the people of Israel came to become in harmony with God. They knew where He lived. I mean, even our ministers say it here every Sunday, welcome to the house of the Lord.
So what you're saying with that is, you don't have to be a person to be holy.
You don't have to be a...
You don't have to be a person to be considered holy.
Oh, things can be.
Things can be holy. To God, things were holy, right? What happened with Moses when he came looking for that sheep? Where did he come around
Take
Mount
off
Sinai?
your shoes for this ground.
And
ground
God
is
said,
holy.
take off your shoes, for the ground on which you stand is holy. Why? Why was it holy?
God was there.
God was there.
So things that are dedicated to God are holy. Even in the temple, they were dedicated for God's purposes. They are holy.
Or connected to Him. It was interesting because when His presence departed, the holiness left too. He said, I'm going to destroy this place. You know, it's interesting to see the contrast where people latched onto things that had been associated with God and were holy by extension. But when God was no longer in those things, they forgot about that. Even the ark. When the ark was taken as a token, as a kind of a good luck charm to bring them victory in the battle of the Philistines, God says, I'm not going with you. And they found out that the thing itself was not the critical thing. Even Christ pointed to that, of course, too. He says, what's greater? You know, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? What's greater, the gift or the altar that it's offered on? It's the association with God. And when the association with God is removed, the thing that was holy can become cursed even.
And that even applies to, our religious rituals, Even our worship can become offensive to God.
It can be even farther than that, it can even apply to us,
Right.
right? Or it talks about what happens with apostasy, that which was once holy and cleansed, what happens if it turns back. It's in a worse state than it was before it was sanctified. So,
And I'm just thinking of your example with the ark, right, where they were kind of using something that had religious significance, that where God's presence was there at one time, right? And thinking they could use it for their purpose without practicing the presence of God.
so are we saying basically that God's holiness is communicable? It can be shared. Right?
God's holiness is being connected to the source of holiness.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, by connection.
So, to summarize that, God says in Romans 1, the Apostle Paul, through the Spirit of God, says, they worship the creature more than the Creator. So, Jeremiah says, they say the temple, right? They place so much, because they had the temple, they were the people of God, but God destroyed that. He brought the Babylonians in. So you got the temple, I'm going to get rid of it. You worship the bronze serpent, it's going to be smashed. And so instead of focusing on the giver, they're focusing on the gift. And that's how.
Well, think the same thing Paul said in, with 2 Corinthians when he talked about, know ye not that you are the temple of God,
Exactly.
right? And this was what, 15 years from the temple being destroyed? Don't worry so much, he's saying, about the temple, that building. You now are the temple of God. You can be holy through him.
Well, that's the interesting thing. He gives us the picture of holiness in objects in the Old Testament.
Right.
But then the New Testament, it transitions. There's this interesting transition where it no longer matters where you worship. It no longer matters who you are or what you're connected with. Because that lesson has been learned. Now you are the temple of God.
And that comes back into the end with all of this. I mean, this is pretty daunting stuff when we look at it and we say, well, God is perfect, and it's trying to attach any kind of holiness to nothing. Are you going to touch on this next week?
No.
That you were going to say is that, is it even possible? And I think Paul sort of opens the door to it. Temple went down. Temple's going down. It's no longer there. You have become the temple of God. You now are the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. So, yes, you're right. The temple goes, and we become vessels in ourselves. Any other comments on that section?
I was just gonna read Hebrews 12 that you kind of referred to. See that you refuse not him that speaketh, for if they escape not which who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall not we escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. But now he promised once more, yet once more I shake not the earth, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifying the removing those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore, we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. It's a very different picture from the kind of your buddy that will fix all your problems image that we sometimes portray when we market Christianity.
And it goes back to the attributes of God, right? If we don't, this is why it's important to know the attributes of God. God is not just love, although he is love.
Right.
But God is just. God is holy, right? And God is awesome. And so we need to see every attribute of God. And we missed one thing there to confirm what I'm just saying is God is immutable. God doesn't,
That's the one that
God doesn't change.
he doesn't change.
Right? So, because he is grace, he chose, when Christ came, to show his grace through Christ. But in the Old Testament, he came across as a wrathful God, or vengeance, God with vengeance. Not because he's changing. He always had those attributes. But he decided to display through Christ grace and truth, because he now had the Messiah, the Lamb, that took away the sin of the world. So he hasn't changed.
God himself told Moses his name, merciful, gracious, long-suffering.
Exodus 34.
So it's interesting to see throughout the entire scripture, from the Old Testament through to the New, how God's attributes are sequentially revealed. He's revealed first as the creator, then he's revealed as the lawgiver, then he's revealed as a redeemer, the one who rescues his people, and it keeps going, just, and so on. But the full revelation, Christ comes and tells us that he's our Father, and then he shows us the revelation of his mercy through Jesus Christ in the way that he dealt with his Son on the cross on our behalf. So these attributes are revealed one after another, but it's not really until the New Testament.
And
we
yet
have a
they were
full
all
picture.
there. I think we can.
They were all there.
They were all
Yeah.
there to begin
They
with.
were all
right?
there.
Just rolled out
Yeah.
as needed.
I like that, rolled out.
Yeah.
I don't have introduced, whatever.
Yeah.
But no, I'm so.
It was a scroll. It was rolled out.
Yeah.
And when you teach your kids, right, if you go too quick to mercy, your kids never understand the distinction, they never understand the law, the rule, the principle, and you go quick to forgiveness, you know, you're not helping the child. In today's day and age, our culture filters our view of God. We like love, but we have a real problem with the fact, you know, that he wiped out the Amalekites. That's just, you know, it doesn't fit in people's, you know, culturally acceptable, loving God.
I think
Picture.
though that's a definition though, because people have lost the definition of love in secular society. What, right, just throw it out there, what is love? Can anyone define it? It's not some warm sentiment. It never is, it never was. I mean, I'm all for warm sentimental feelings. But love, like the pursuit of holiness, is an act of the will, to will the good of the other.
Exactly.
And
To
so,
their well-being.
you know, and so,
So
I think the secular version of love, that's where it was lost. That's where it is lost.
another very important attribute is truth. God is truth.
Do we not have truthful here?
Well, you got faithful, which is related somehow. But,
He keeps his promises.
You're right, truthful.
so truth, God is true.
I
Right?
am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah, he gives us the spirit of truth. And you've got to love in truth. You know, if you love with a false understanding of the relationship and what you can and cannot do in that relationship, it's gonna fault. And when you abuse your partner or when you do this or that, it's not in truth. And then it'll crumble. If you try to buy love with money, it'll fail. Right? You don't love for what they can give you. You love because of the value you see in that
Exactly
person.
right, yes. Much like praying for your enemies.
Right.
Praying for those who can never repay you,
No.
who want to see you go down. Yeah.
Plus, even with kids though too, I mean, when you hold a child or an adult accountable for their actions, and this world nowadays calls it tough love. No, it's not tough love, it's just plain
True love.
love.
Mhm.
True love.
And we see also, as you're saying, going through history, right? Initially, you know, God had to make distinctions. He had to make categories. You know, he distinguished between light and darkness, between dry land and water. He distinguished between the water above the sky and the water below. He distinguished, you know, between, you know, man and animals, and then between right and wrong, and between holy and unholy, unholy and unholy food, holy and unclean and unclean animals. So much of Leviticus, you know, and so on is, you know, making distinctions and categories. He's the God who creates order from the chaos, right? And so much of our culture today is against categories. We want to wipe out every distinction. We don't even accept the distinction between man and woman. We don't like the distinction between man and animals. We don't want the distinction between right and wrong. We don't want any distinctions anymore. We think that will give us the freedom to do as we please, but it's removing the framework for life and hope and holiness and love in the process.
I'm glad you brought up Leviticus, because that, I'm telling you, among my secular friends, they will say the same thing. I mean, Leviticus, it's all about moralizing and rules and priest and temple, and it's very off-putting to them. And yet, once you crack the code of it, Leviticus does not really sound that bad, once you really understand what it's all about. And yet people will look at me and say, oh, you'll read from Leviticus 19:2. Oh, Leviticus, I don't want to hear about it. I'm out of that. You know, that's just moralizing. That's just legalizing. We'll get into misconceptions later. But they miss the whole point of it. And I think once you crack the code of Leviticus, it's not as onerous as it sounds. At least to me, it's not. So,
Well, in Galatians 4, Paul was very clear that the law was a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. He wanted to bring these distinctions out. There is a difference between God and man. There is a difference between clean and unclean. There is a difference between holy and unholy. And all these things pointed, all the sacrifices, all the rituals, all the ceremonies, all pointed to the one Christ that died on the cross. And Hebrews 9 and 10 goes into real great detail of the temple, the tabernacle, and show you what the meanings were about. But
It's that separation. They even had a special feast once a year, the holiest day, the day of atonement, right? Atonement.
Yeah.
The idea that that there is something dividing man and God, and there's clean and unclean, the recognition of that, right? And then once a year, there was an offering that was made, and that one day was called the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur is the Jewish name for it, right? The holiest day, the day when God and man once more become one for a brief time through a sacrifice. It's so interesting to see how these pictures were given, right? The schoolmaster, this parable, as it were, was given because we couldn't recognize our problem on our own. God had to show us what was wrong with us so that later
It was
on.
almost an act of mercy, wasn't
Yeah.
it? It almost was, you know, people think, oh, it's somehow being dictatorial. It's not. It was just like the Ten Commandments were an act of mercy. You can't do it on your
It was therapeutic.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
anyone that would look at these
Yes.
things, even Solomon, the wisest man, at the end of all this stuff, so what's the conclusion of all of this? He basically says, look, the answer's with God, you gotta obey him.
Mm.
To him, it still was not fully clear. The wisest man back then, he still didn't quite understand or know what we know. He said, just obey God, keep his commandments, that's the whole duty of man.
Leave the consequences to him.
Yeah, the answer, like, it ends in contradictions. He says, I looked at wisdom, I looked at folly, I saw that wisdom was better than folly, but the same thing happens to both of us, both the fool and the wise man, right? All these things are interesting. So he realized the limit that he came to. He couldn't step over. He said that the answer is basically with God, hear his commandments. And Moses basically says the same thing when he says, look, there's going to be a prophet like unto me that's going to come. Listen to him. He's going to tell you more, in essence, right? Like he was basically telling the children of Israel, the law will one day be defunct. There's going to be a new lawgiver. And he says, you've heard it said in old time, but I say
Right,
unto you.
yes.
Right?
In Matthew,
There's going to be
sure,
something
yes.
more coming.
Yes.
And they didn't clue in on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, they changed their national anthem today.
Really?
Again?
In all of us?
Canadian national anthem?
Or which
We
one?
all of us commend.
Yeah.
No more all our sons commend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Gender neutral,
Come on.
gender
No,
neutral.
I just heard her on the way to
Yeah.
CFG.
I agree.
So, yeah. So soon they're gonna change it to something else, to include LGBT and X and Y and everything. I mean, it's a one small step for man, one huge step for their agenda. That's what they're doing slowly and surely.
It's not slowly, it's
I
accelerating.
mean, it would be really.
I mean,
Well, when
they
you
changed
change
one
the
word,
God
right?
keep our land.
When you change the language, then you change the way people think. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the problem. And it quickly happened.
They change one word in his hymn
Yeah.
or an anthem, and next year they're gonna come with something else, you watch, guaranteed.
But if God keep our land, we keep our land.
We keep our land. That line, I'm sure he
As
was.
soon as that
Yeah,
happens,
really,
we're gonna
yeah.
get
That's the
attacked by
next
North
step.
Korea.
That's the next one.
And then the
Yeah.
flag's not gonna be red and white, it's gonna be rainbow.
Or the North Korean flag.
Yeah.
We're into the weeds now.
But that's where it's going to.
And so we can see. So we've seen God's attributes. We know we have to understand sort of the facets of holiness. I think it'd be helpful now to consider what are common misconceptions of holiness. What do people generally think when we go out on the street and we say we're holy? Do we say that? We go to church because we're holy. What does that mean to the average John Q. public?
I think they think of morality, right? But like they approach the essence of God in a wrong way. And I'm glad you mentioned the Ten Commandments before, because in the first few commandments, God doesn't actually say thou shalt not, right? He actually establishes himself as like the divine being in this universe, the one whose existence is in himself, right? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. I am thy God, right? And so if you approach morality from that respect, where he separates like the divine nature of God and the faulty nature of man, right? Then you understand his redemption power before morality, right? Because people understand morality as it comes before redemption. No, redemption comes before morality, right? And that's what, like, in the first verse of Exodus 20, God established that I took you out of Egypt, right? It's that redemption, and then I am your God, and then now you have to be holy and follow my laws, right?
One word that came up is legalism, about about, oh, you're holy, that means you dress a certain way, you observe different things. Is that a valid argument? Holiness is not legalism, I get that, but that's certainly a misconception that has come up. It's abstaining from certain activities, it's modest dress, it's a
series of prohibitions.
series of prohibitions,
Yeah.
things you cannot do, and you live this puritanical life, and you keep your head down, and you don't cause trouble. It's sort of this moral high ground that we tend to take, and I think
It's a sense of smug superiority.
smug superiority is, yes.
Over
And,
them now.
you know, we go back, and it's funny because I know, you know, my walk with the Lord has not been as long as some in here, but I have one friend I've known for at least 30 years who grew up in a Christian home, we were Pentecostal, and he had, as he puts it, he had religion jammed down his throat. And when he was 16, he wanted no more to do with it. And he talks to me now, we talk now, very polite guy, I don't, you know, call him Steve. The same thing, and he says, well, you're going to church now, you're reading the Bible, and I said, yeah, why did you? He says, you Christians, he says, you're weird. You guys are weird. And I used to take that as almost sort of an insult. But there is sort of, and I'm being edgy here, but there is a certain sort of weirdness about us that I'm almost glad he says, yes, we are kind of weird. If we sort of, if this is what we think about, if this is what we sort of pursue, then I don't take so much of this, oh, you know, you guys are strange. Yeah, we are other than, we are not of this world. We are a little bit peculiar. That's it, you're peculiar like. And so when he says you're weird, I said, well, thanks, that's exactly what I want to hear. If I certainly don't want to somehow say here that I'm but he came out first thing to say, well, there's just some kind of weirdness about you that I don't understand. And I doubt.
Can you imagine? Oh, I fell asleep on the train once, the GO train, and waiting for it to pull out of the station. As I lifted my head, just about to pull out, and all these people were coming into the train, and they had studs in their hair, I don't know, red, purple hair. They had bolts through their noses. I don't know what they had. All leather jackets, and studs, and chains, and I thought, what am I? And I'm the weird one.
Yeah, you, correct.
I'm the weird one.
Yes.
In San Francisco.
So I thought,
Everyone had tattoos and beards and piercings, and I'm walking around with a normal short haircut,
Yeah.
clean shaven, thinking I'm sticking out here.
yeah, I'm the weird one, okay.
But it's almost a badge of honor. I mean, I know when I've had, my own family will say it, not Sandy's side, but they'll say the same thing. You're still going to try. We just don't quite understand. There's something different about you. And before I would think that's just, I mean, there's a little bit of ignorance in that, I get. But it's almost a small badge of honor that, yes, they're getting it now. Because we are a little, and I don't like to use the word weird, but just to be edgy.
Peculiar. Is
Peculiar, like,
the word.
wait, you guys get together, you stay at church all day, some of you talk about this, you pray. I think it's a good witness, and people are noticing it, which is good.
Well, but they may misperceive it, right? They say, oh, you go to church, you think you're better than me.
You think you're better than me.
I don't know if I want to hang around with you.
That's where the
You
holier
feel
than thou
like there's
comes.
something
You're
wrong.
not going to talk about God all day, are you? I've gotten that one too. Can we not talk about that? I get that as well. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting, people also notice the side effects of that. Like even with our own family, we're in the public school system, right? And it's interesting to see people, like the teachers and other parents even that we know that we're friends with, they know that we're different and we do things differently and we don't, do some of the things that they do. But they see the byproduct of that lifestyle and they even commend us for that. It's kind of this interesting, but they don't want to, of course, do that for themselves, like.
Oh, of course.
It's good for you.
It's good for you if that works for you.
But they note that. Like
Yeah.
there's this understanding that this is a good way
Yeah.
because of what I see
Yeah.
here. But
That irony is lost on them,
Yeah,
though, isn't it?
yeah.
That they see the benefits
The
of
byproduct,
it. You get the byproducts of it, yet, I either don't have time for it or that's just, and that leads into another misconception of holiness in that it is only for a chosen few. Now, I'm not talking about 5-point Calvinism here, but is holy, you're something different. I can't be like that. God does say that he wishes that no one, I'm paraphrasing, no one perishes, that all be saved. All are called to holiness. Go.
I listened to some comments and I understand where the brothers sisters coming from. You know, like the world is becoming worse and worse and going away from God. And you know, sometimes looks like we are on the losing side. I just want to bring one thing. You know, like I certainly believe as we go towards the end of the times that will be fulfilled what God said, that there will be dividing between the sheep and the goats. And I found this verse in the Revelation, and it, I think, relates to our topic today. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. So, you know, God is just allowing us, and our true nature is going to come to their extremes, and there will be that separation. And when God takes everybody to judgment, nobody will have to can say anything, because they will know whatever they get as justice from God is.
And this is a good point. They can't say
is
anything.
true. There's no word. Nobody can say that's wrong, because everybody will know it's
And
true
how many
right.
times have you heard people half joking say, "Oh, when I meet God, I'm going to tell him."
Yeah.
There's going to be a conversation.
No.
And yeah,
There will be no.
there's no conversation.
No.
Yeah,
It'll be jelly on the floor.
So
I would
here's
think.
another misconception too. Holiness is divisive, and the pursuit of holiness leads to isolation. I think that's a.
You think that's a
Is
myth?
that true
No, I
or a
think-
misconception?
Well, depends how you look at it. I would say
So,
it's a
I missed that.
misconception. So holiness is divisive,
Divisive?
right? You know, look at all those Christians and their splinter groups and split churches and stuff, and why can't they all just get along?
Oh, it's one big
Why
denomination.
are
sure.
these details so important? You know, you see holiness as details, and but that's not actually true. And the pursuit of holiness leads to isolation. Now that can be looked at in two different ways.
Exactly.
One is the Isaiah way, where it says, "Stand thou there, for I'm holier than thou," right? As the one says. But it's also true that holiness will sometimes isolate you. But that holiness in and of itself is not isolationary, in the sense that God wants us to join Him, and as many as will come, right? The invitation, "Be ye holy," is actually an invitation
To join, yeah.
and a command. It's both, and that in God's holiness is joy, is peace, is fellowship.
Yeah, I think that's what St. Marjam gave in her testimony on last Sunday and Saturday night. That in the people of God, yes, you know, you need to cross a divide, and you may be seen by others, you know, because Jesus said, "I came to bring a sword and cause division." But on the other hand, you know, she has spent 30 years in this country, and she has never found a people group with whom she can identify and feel like she's family. You know, and it wasn't because they're the same ethnicity and they spoke the same mother tongue, or, you know, had the same socioeconomic background, because in God's you know, body, we cross all those distinctions and categories are washed away by the blood of Christ between gender and ethnicity and socioeconomic barriers. You know, that's the integration, because His transcendence brings us all together, and we can actually be, you know, united at a level that is impossible in the world in all those splinter groups. So, you know, sin actually isolates. We say, oh, there's a party in hell. Well, no, Jesus describes hell as being in total isolation, darkness, and gnashing of teeth as you live with your own regrets and torment. You know, it's in God that there's true communion, the fellowship, you know, comes when we walk in the light with God and with each other.
That's why they found it so interesting in the Nazarenes. How come Romanians, Hungarians, and Germans, we all get along?
Right.
And outside there,
They
you
don't.
have the Serbians,
yeah.
the Croats at each throat, and
Right. Yeah, the Serbian priest was commenting on that, you know, kind of 100 years ago. Like, even Serb with Serb, we can't get along like these can across ethnical boundaries. I think that is.
You don't pick on church.
No.
But the perception was too that, well, you used to go with us before, you used to do what we do, and now you're not doing that anymore. You're gonna stay home and read your Bible. If that's holiness, I don't want any part of that.
Exactly,
That-
because
That's the other perspective.
Is it joyless?
Yeah,
That's-
Is it joyless? Is being holy, is this whole pursuit? What do we call it, a dour existence?
Right.
This sad, sort of lonely,
Mhm.
oh, woe is me existence?
Mhm.
Is that, I think it's a misconception.
That's clearly.
I don't,
It's true joy is not. And the other thing is, you have the Catholic concept that, okay, there's the average person, we're all Christians, and, as long as we go through these certain rituals, we all belong to the Christian collective, but for those who want to, the extra, you can go be a monk or a nun, or, and so you have this separate, existence, and, that's kind
At
of an
another
optional,
level, sure.
isolated, deprived thing that we see holiness as for the few, the saints.
yes.
Whereas the Bible calls us all saints, that's just the select.
That's why the Waldenses run into problem.
Waldensians?
Yeah, they recognize us more dedicated and closer to the Bible. That's okay, but when you try to propagate, convert others too, then hey, wait a moment.
Right, and that's where Peter Waldo started, he went to the priest and said, I'm feeling challenged, to give away, he was a very rich, wealthy man, and had a very rich acquaintance die in the circle around him, and so he felt convicted by God to do more, to give away his wealth and to live for God, and the priest said, oh, that's fine, you can do that as, the optional select thing, and he felt, no, this is for everybody. Right, and that's where he crossed, the church, and when he became persecuted, when, like you said, he said this is for everybody, this complete dedication, emulation.
What about purgatory? A lot of the Catholics think of purgatory, so you, as long as you don't do any bad stuff, like really big stuff, then you're holy, kind of thing.
You're redeemable through your own suffering.
Well, you go through purgatory.
Yes.
You go through purgatory, and then you.
Purification.
Purgatory for just the extra cleaning, the extra scrub. Yeah.
Well,
That's one of my deal killers.
And money
Yeah.
helps.
And, touche, brother. Yes, leaving an envelope with yes.
Vicky,
For
you wanna
people
say
that
something?
torture themselves, they put a shoe in their,
Oh.
or they beat themselves with a
Ascetics.
stick.
Ascetics, yes, ascetics, yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a ritual at Loch Derg in Ireland where Catholics will go for 3 days. So they'll drop you off on a little boat and you walk around the island for 3 days with bare feet, and all you do is pray. You're not allowed to sleep, you're not allowed to eat. It's prayer and fasting. And it's sort of, purgatory on earth. And it's a ritual done year round. And if you fall asleep, there are attendants there to wake you up. They have little crosses where you'll all, same kind of thing. And people feel cleansed by it, just like the St. James pilgrimage, doing it on your knees up to the temple. But somehow you're paying your...
Jesus didn't do enough, you have to do
Yeah, exactly, right. As if that wasn't enough. Yeah. So I think we've covered just about everything we wanted to cover today. And so with the sort of lead into the next week, all this sounds great. All of this is, all good. We know this now. We know the facets of holiness. We know the misconceptions. If it doesn't fit with your plans and your friends, should you be, and this is a question to take home that Phil will pick up on Tuesday, should we feel motivated to pursue it if it doesn't fit in with the plans of your friends? Should we feel motivated to pursue it on our own at all? Do we feel like it's a dour existence? I say it doesn't. But why should we pursue it? The world tells you can have everything you want. It's all in yourself. Listen to the Scientologists, they'll tell you that. Everything you need is inside you. You don't need anything else.
Plenty of Christians will tell you that too.
And maybe so.
You can be a saved sinner, so I love it.
When you were talking about all these things, the only thought that keeps going through my mind when I think about Leviticus and I think about the things that God wants us to obey and to do And the one example that I remember giving to somebody at one time was, if I'm looking after a child, and I take that child and I put that child out on the front lawn and say, go play, and they don't give any fences within which to play, and then I don't love that child. But if I really love that child, I'm gonna put in fences. And I'm gonna say, don't cross those fences, because I love that child. And so, for me, to obey God and to do what He wants me to do, no matter what it is to say, thank you, Lord, for the fences. Because I may not know, but I can tell you so many times when I have been grateful to the Lord for those fences. Even now, since I became a widow, very much so.
You realize now that they're actually a blessing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I realized it back then too. I mean, I can remember going to work, and I remember when they had brought the bigwigs down and they were gonna bring in these new mandates that would be, if you were Muslim, you couldn't wear your head covering, which would mean mine would have to come off, and I always wore a skirt. And I was like, okay, Lord, and I remember talking to a customer who was a Christian, and, she made a comment about the fact that I always wear a skirt and that I was very legalistic. And I said to her, I said, matter of fact, right now we're going through this thing. I said, but what is legalistic about if Christ died on the cross for me, if he gave the way He gave for me, ought I not to do whatever He asked me to do just simply because I love Him? And her comment back to me was, well, we'll see on Monday what happens with you, after this ruling comes in. On Monday, when I was at work with my skirt and my head covering, and she came through, and she didn't say anything, but the next time I saw her, she was wearing a skirt. I thought that was...
So we can't deny that Christ gives us commands. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. But His commandments aren't grievous.
No.
They're there for a reason. He puts them there because He loves us. For that reason, for our protection, for our edification. And He knows it's going to make us... and we can go back to them and say, did you listen to your boss at work? Yeah, well then you're legalistic. No. Because I know it's part of the company and it makes a company function. We have procedures, protocols, and so. So there's a reason. All things work to good when we follow Christ's commands. So it's not a matter of legal, and we want to do them. That's the key.
Isn't it funny how Christ doesn't change what we do, and He changes what we want to do?
Yeah, that's the key. The
Yeah.
key is that we have the desire to do.
But obedience is not for God's benefit, it's for ours. And this is hopefully where we'll go with the next day's lesson, is that we'll realize that holiness was our natural state, in the sense that we were designed to be holy, to be in communion with God. And the problem comes from our warped perspective now on the other side of the fall. And that coming back to God's viewpoint and His way of looking at things is actually the fulfillment and the fullness of our existence. And the irony, of course, is that Satan sold us a false bill of goods by telling us that God's holding out on us by us pursuing holiness. That's probably a good spot to end.
Yeah.
So there we have it. Yeah. Don't give away too much.
Thank you, Brother Brian, for leading this Bible study.
Thanks for being a supportive group.
I believe that we could use you here more.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of nodding heads on that.
Thanks, brother. Can we close with a prayer?
We're gonna close.
Yes. Brother
Why don't
Greg.
you pray?
Okay.
Right?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, once again, we are so grateful once again to be brought together here on a quiet Wednesday night, dear Father, to start a new journey. Maybe we only scratched the surface of your holiness, dear Father, but it's certainly an encouraging start, that we can look at these things, that we can dwell on them, that we can think about them, and most companies that we can talk with our brothers and sisters and our friends about your holiness. We pray, dear Father, you found our pursuit pleasing, and that you continue with us as we continue to hone the weekly lessons, dear Father. Be with us as we continue to think about these things and go deeper into your word. And once again, to get a grasp, even a minor grasp on your holiness, as large as it is. We thank you, dear Father, for bringing us here safely. Watch over us as we travel home. Be with our loved ones, those that could not be here, our brothers and sisters and friends who are broken, who are shut in, who are sick. Continue to be with them and comfort them. And we thank you once again, dear Father, for blessings that we can't even begin to count. We pray them all in Jesus' name. Amen.
I think that was just all perfect.
Good to go. Is this on? Yeah, it is. Hey, Elijah.
They just take a picture of everything before.
I think it's a good blend.
Well,
The only thing is that you got the fruit bomb on us.
which one?
With the,